Okay, so we talked a little bit about someone's at your office, what kind of things are you going to be looking at? When are you thinking, okay, this person might be a good candidate for some of the skilled worker options, be it federal or provincial? We have someone who's young, good work experience, good English or French level, good education, um, solid years of work experience. And then we talked about maybe business people who could be good to navigate some of the programs. Now, when do I consider OINP? So as I told you, it's sometimes when I'm meeting someone for the first time, it's sometimes easier to rule out whether provincial options are available or not first, in terms of, do you have a job offer in the province, in any province in Canada? Do you have any work experience? Do you have any studies? No. Okay, given your occupation, I don't think there's any strategic recruitment programs open for people without job offers. I don't think the provincial programs are an option for you. If you get a job offer, then maybe let me know. There could be other options. Let's look at the federal ones. But let's say we have someone who might do the federal, it qualifies for the federal, um, might not be very competitive. When do I, or someone who qualifies for the federal, but they might qualify for the provincial as well. How do I decide whether to go with one or the other? And at least the way that I do it is that if someone has good opportunities under express entry, so one of the federal programs there, and they would have a competitive score, I would go with that. I mean, it's going to be easy, one process, straight to the federal government. You're going to get your PR most likely in less than 6 months. If I have someone who's a little bit older, their English level is not that competitive, their education doesn't make them very competitive, they have limited opportunities under express entry, okay, maybe let's consider OINP if it's a case of Ontario. They have a job offer in the province that always like kind of like lights a light bulb in my head. Okay, they have some tie to this might lead to being able to navigate one of the employer-driven programs in the province. We obviously have to make sure that the employer, the position, and the employee meet the requirements, but it could be an option. They have work experience in the province. Okay, that could be an option as well. We'll have to see. And if someone says, well, I just finished my master's, or I recently finished my master's, or I'm about to finish my PhD in Ontario, I immediately think, okay, there's definitely options there as well. There could be others. I mean, they could be someone with a master's who might be competitive under express entry, and that might be the way to do it. But at least I'm thinking, okay, there might be options here under OINP. And obviously, if it's someone who has a business background, then I'm thinking about whether they have sufficient money to set up a business in Ontario, which is expensive in terms of like the PNP program. And if that's the case, are they going to be competitive or not? And again, we're just introducing this subject. We'll talk about the different requirements and what makes someone competitive and the other. Okay, so we have a clarification of the question that we had. It was to complete the question for masters online in Canada. Okay, so we have someone who did an online master's with an Ontario institution, and with that, they were granted a PGWP, which normally sometimes they're quite strict about when they grant the PGWP for people who do online programs. I think, so as I said, I don't have the guidelines in front of me. I would look into that closely. It is possible. I'm not sure exactly what kind of online program it was, but if the person meets the residency requirements, so they've been able to reside in Ontario for the last 2 years prior to the application, I would probably do actually two things. One of them would be look in the guideline and see what they say about online programs. If it was online exclusively, because sometimes you might have online, but also some part-time studies in Canada. And then if that doesn't provide like a satisfactory answer, I would probably call OINP. We've sometimes asked very pointed questions to them and gotten confirmation of whether you can do something or you can't do something. So I think it's definitely worth exploring prior to maybe them reopening the master stream if they open it. And we'll talk about this stream later on. The problem with this stream, and well, actually it's a slide that we're covering right now, is that it opens and it closes on the same day. So try to have your answer before they reopen. Or, register your client if we were to open tomorrow, for instance, and then definitely try to get an answer within the 14 days of sending the application. Because again, this is one of the things that you don't want to get your client all excited. You don't want to do all this work and then find out that something is not eligible, and you should have been able to, or could have been able to know that before. Sometimes we do have clients who you tell them, listen, I don't think this is going to be accepted, and they say, I want you to do it anyway. I mean, and if they've provided you consent to do that, then that's a little bit different. But yeah, I would probably ask Ontario and look at the guidelines that I'm posting later on. Okay, so 2018, quota 6,600. Last year it was 6,000, and compare that to, like, let's say 2014, which is not that long ago. 4 years ago, it was 2,500. So PNP is definitely growing. It's becoming like a pretty big deal. It's becoming like a good alternative for people to come to Canada when they can't qualify for the federal programs. So Express Entry in 2015 brought something right, which is no more occupation lists, right? So we don't have to worry about an occupation list for federal skilled worker. We don't have to worry about occupation restrictions for CEC. So that was good. But the limitation is that now not everyone who meets the requirements can apply under the programs. And especially for people who were already in Canada, who had the CEC experience, it was pretty simple for them to be able to apply as long as they did it prior to the cap being reached by the end of the year. Now a lot of them don't qualify. I mean, you've probably met a lot of people who came to Canada with the idea of studying, working, and then applying for permanent residence, and because of their age or language level or their education level, they just find that they're not competitive. To the advantage of some of them, they're working and they have an employer who likes them and they're willing to help them with an application, so they're able to navigate these programs as long as the employer meets the requirements, of course, and they have the offer and the position that they need. But after Express Entry and the fact that it became a lot more competitive to be able to come to Canada or to transition in Canada to PR if you're already here, we see PNP programs really growing. And obviously that's when we see the federal government allotting a lot more spots to the provinces. If you look at the statistics, it's really interesting. I mean, all the people who come to Ontario, I think only around 20% of the people are coming through the PNP. But of the people who go to somewhere like PI as permanent residents, around 90%, 80 to 90% of people are going through the PNP. So it definitely shows that it's working pretty well for the provinces to attract people. Now, whether the people are staying in the provinces or not, that's a different question. And again, we'll talk about that commitment at the end of this lecture. Now, a little bit of the news that happened that took, or the opening and closing of programs and news relating to OINP this year. If you Google OINP news, you're going to be able to always get this. It's something that I check, I would say at least weekly. I'm always says that the programs are going to close, or the intake is going to close, or they're going to open or close the program. So I check this very, very often. And I think it's good to do so. That way you can find out also if there's been draws for the entrepreneur stream or for the human capital priority stream. So this year we had something exciting happen, which is the Ontario Immigration Act coming into force. I think it's been quite a few years since they've been. Sorry. Just have a phone making noise here. So it's been quite a while that they've already been talking about this act, talking about the implementation of the act, but it took a while for it to, get to be done. It's finally passed into law, and it kind of formalizes a lot of the things that we. Sorry, that's just really okay. Just closing the door so the phone is less distracting. Okay, so January 1st, 2018, Ontario Immigration Act comes into force. This doesn't mean that the OINP did not exist before. This doesn't mean that OINP was not working well before. It's just, it provides for extra things, but it also formalizes things that exist before. So basically, the Act formalizes the minister's powers in relation to immigration, which is something important. It provides more transparency, it provides more guidelines, but also provides Ontario more leverage vis-a-vis the federal government. And we also have kind of like legislation that provides for the principles and procedures that guide OINP. And there's also regulations, which they can change a lot more easily than the Act, but there's regulations that talk about the selection criteria for the different programs. So before, we were just basing ourselves as immigration practitioners on the guidelines that you would find online, the OINP website, to be able to make decisions into how things would be processed. If we were having any discussions with an officer, that's what we could only be base ourselves on. Now we have legislation to do so. And obviously the guidelines are still very important. The online guides are important. What you see online is important, but now we have kind of like more hard law to be able to argue our cases. That's one part of it. The other part, which is quite significant, is that now we have very robust sections on the powers of the province to inspect employers and do investigations into employers and also candidates, so employees, people who applied for permanent residence, and it establishes penalties, different offenses, and enforcement procedures. And that's quite important. So like I would before, it was very kind of like up in the air what happens if someone applies to Ontario and then the employer does not follow through with what they're supposed to be doing in terms of like the job offer that they have, and the pay, the hours, like all those kind of things. So, and now just like ESDC and IRCC have stepped up on enforcement, so has Ontario. And they have similar powers in terms of like just being able to show up at a place of work and carry out their inspections and investigations. So that's something quite significant, new, and I know that Ontario is kind of like doing more work right now on making that happen. And then obviously they have like the legislative background to do so through the Act. So that I'm not gonna go into the Act much. Like, I mean, I think what we're gonna be talking about OINP is gonna be enough in terms of like understanding the programs. You can obviously take a look at it, but as I said, it kind of like formalized a lot of things that we already knew before, principles and procedures. And again, one of the things that really stood out with the Act was the new powers. What's an offense now under the Act? What are the investigation powers of the ministry, and how do they enforce these powers? Then on January 18, 2018, all streams from OINP open, except for the two student streams, master's and PhD stream. They all remain open right now up to this point. We are getting close to August, so we're starting to get to that point that I kind of like feel a little bit uneasy about when is the cap going to be reached, when are the streams going to close, but they remain open all year. Something interesting is that the employer-driven streams have actually remained open for registration all year. The way that they did it last year was they would open, close the registration throughout the year. And this year we thought it was going to be that way, so we were kind of like acting based on that, but they've actually remained open all year. And during one of the trainings, they said that they'll probably keep it open until they know that they've kind of like reached the quota or they're close to reaching the quota. The masters is a little bit different. They don't, very popular program. So this is one of those that it is like buying tickets for like, I don't know, like Taylor Swift coming to Toronto, or like, I don't know, playoffs tickets for like the Blue Jays online, or the Raptors. It is really basically as soon as the program opens, you have to be there. You have to be lucky that, I mean, you're able to like register right away, and then if you don't, then you miss your chance. Especially this is a program that's really easy to navigate. All you need is a master's, certain English or French level, and having certain funds. And then for a lot of people who don't have any work experience, which is quite common amongst people who've just gone through their undergrad and then their master's, this is a program for them. So as soon as it opens, as you see in January 29th, master's in the PhD stream opened. That same day, few minutes later, the master stream had paused. It reopened on April 5th, and then it paused that same day. And again, I don't have any inside information of whether it's going to be reopening again or not, but just keep checking this often. Obviously, as soon as you hear someone talk about it or post anything about it, if you have a client that you've been waiting to register, go and register your client right away. I provided a link where you can get that kind of information, as well as information about the draws, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, in terms of the quota, so these are not the most up-to-date numbers. Unfortunately, they're the ones available on the website. We know that as of May 3rd, 2018, which again, it's been a couple of months, number of nominations, 2,601, and remaining nominations, 4,000 basically. But I would imagine this has changed significantly since then. And then we have an idea of the processing times. The masters and the PhD, they're trying to process them in 30 to 60 days. As well as the express entry trade stream. Obviously, masters and PhD stream, they're mainly just looking at the degree. They're not looking at a lot of stuff that has to do with like your work experience, so they're easier to process. And then the other ones, 60 to 90. I would say they've been sticking to the standards. I like last year I was surprised with how like some of the express entry, especially we had a few French speaking skilled worker streams that were like processed in less than a week. So that was pretty impressive. But the last one that we sent, it's been around almost 2 months and it's still processing. So I think they are kind of like around there. And these are good processing times, right? Ontario, before they reopened, it was a whole mess and like it was almost impossible to get any information or any communication with them. When they had the old system before, it was a paper application and the employer-driven streams were totally different. We were talking about like years in the processing of just your nomination certificate, and then you have to apply for permanent residence. So they've definitely stepped up their game with the online registration. They've done a much better job. There's obviously still drawbacks from that, but I mean, these are decent processing times. If you tell your client, okay, it's going to be like a couple of months to have your nomination certificate, then you can apply for a work permit if eligible, and then you can apply for permanent residence. I think that's a good option to navigate. So Kyle is asking a question. My advice regarding managing client expectations when dealing with quotas. Yeah, that's actually a good point to talk about this. Straight from the consultation. I mean, basically, if I have someone, let's say, for instance, like I'll give you a few examples. I have someone who might be eligible for the master's stream because they graduated recently from a master's, but they might also be as well for under express entry. I normally tell them, okay, listen, we can enter into an agreement, and we'll do one of two things. So we'll start preparing for, I don't know, we'll start preparing your work experience or stuff like that. If the master's reopens, we'll register for the master's and we'll do that one. But if it doesn't, then we'll do the other one. And you just have to know that it's very difficult to get you a spot in that program. If it's someone who only qualifies for the master's, then I would probably do like a very low upfront engagement there, maybe with a consultation, which our consultation is paid. I would include registering them for the program once it opens, but I wouldn't sign a retainer because it's very hard to know whether you're going to get a registration spot or not. So there's no point in having signed a retainer, having them pay, let's say, $2,000 into your trust account if you don't know whether it's going to happen or not. And then let's talk about just the quota in general. So like we have people who we're navigating their employer-driven streams right now. Some of them we have registered. If you've registered someone, I'm probably like less concerned because I feel like if they let you register someone, they probably have taken those people into consideration in the processing for this year. I don't know. We'll see. They have been warned that if they reach they could close a program and they could reach a quota. But also there's other people who we haven't registered. They're in the process of gathering the documents. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but one of the reasons why we don't register some people right away in the system to get a spot is because it gives you 14 days to complete the full application. That's not enough time for us to do our work and for the clients to get the documents. So sometimes what we do in those cases is tell them, okay, listen, we'll provide you the list, we'll do the first installment, We'll start working on this. We'll register you when we feel like we're around 14 days of being ready. There's one big caveat, and it's the fact that this program could close anytime. And obviously, the closer that we get to the end of the year, I tell them last year it closed in September, the year before it closed in October, whatever it is, be mindful that I can't guarantee if it doesn't. And if that happens, then what we'll do is that we'll stop work then. You'll be billed for whatever work we would have done. If it's per hour, then whatever work per hour. If it's a fixed fee application, then whatever installments we've done till then. And then we'll have to wait until the next year. But you just have to, from the beginning, tell them. If you don't, then that's going to come back, and it's going to be problematic for you. You have to, every time we're doing a PNP, we tell them, listen, there's limited spots. If it's early in the year, I would say it's early in the year. I think there's a good chance that we'll be able to put this application through. If it's already July, I tell them, okay, there's this option, there's this program, we can start working on it. We can register you when we're like around 14 days of being ready, but just be very well aware that it is possible that the intake will close, that the quotas will be reached, and then in that case, we're going to have to suspend work. So as long as you kind of like manage those expectations, I think you'll be fine. I mean, there's not, I mean, sometimes they get mad at you, but like there's not much that you can do. And some of them we've been pushing. Like, I mean, I don't know, every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, we tell the client, listen, like, I mean, again, how's this document collection going? Remember, we haven't registered this person, and if the registration closes, we won't be able to proceed this year. So we have another question. I've heard about a list of professions for OINP, but I could not find it on their website. Is there such a thing? So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the human capital priority stream. That's the only thing. I mean, there's some programs where there's definitely professions. So you'll see, for instance, when we talk about the semi-skilled, or there's also like